I honestly don't think that I've met a serious business leader yet who thinks that Brexit is a good idea, including amongst those, and I do include myself in this, who have in the past been critical of the EU and some of its approach, particularly on the economy. Few of us, I think, in business believe that Brexit is likely to be anything more than a damage limitation exercise at this stage. And the reason we feel like that is because of the concern that there just seems to be a complete absence of a plan which shows how the cost to business of achieving the stated ambition of leaving the single market and the customs union will be offset by a new trading relationship. And it's this which makes business uncertain and nervous about the future, and prudence demands that contingency plans are put in place and that planned investment that we were looking at here is either reviewed or at least postponed until the picture becomes somewhat clearer. And I'm certain that it's this which is causing the warning signs to flash red before Brexit has even happened. And I would argue that it's this that has accounted for the loss of economic activity, which we can see perhaps reflected in the 0.5% or more of GDP that has been lost since the referendum. I personally, and I have to say this, find it unacceptable for an economy that only a few years ago sat atop of the G7 growth rates, outstripping that of the United States, an economy that was on course to be the world's third biggest by 2030 and now lags at the bottom of that G7 group. And against this backdrop, the productivity rate is on a par with Italy. And I would argue that that has largely hitherto been masked by the economic benefits of EU membership. It is a truly disappointing fact that a German worker can clock off around 5 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon and still have produced more than what a British worker does. These things are absolutely critical to the way that businesses look at investment cases, along with access to markets, skilled workforces, movement of people, and so forth. And this is going to matter greatly going forward once we left the European Union, which of course we have yet to do. When leaders of global capital like Goldman Sachs, Lloyd Blankfein, or JP Morgan's Jamie Dimon start to wonder whether the Brits have lost their heads or whether we like it or not, we'll have to start liking Frankfurt, we better take some notice. Their capital provides the oil for the economy, not to mention the tax receipts for the exchequer, and where they base themselves matters. And guys like this just don't take a punt on governments that are bereft of a clear direction and planning, in my opinion. But they're not alone. EasyJet have begun to recalibrate their operating structures to ensure that they can keep flying post-Brexit. Jaguar Land Rover, not so far up the road from here, recently made cuts which they directly attributed to Brexit. From chemicals to financial services to automotive to pharmaceuticals, companies are either looking for sector-specific deals coming out of these EU negotiations and or putting in place plans to avoid the crunch at Dover or at any other port of entry once we left the EU. I think what many out there just don't appreciate is just how integrated our time-bound supply chains have become since the advent of the single market. Whether it's raw ingredients for the latest chemical product or components for the car, a crunch or a short delay at Dover doesn't just mean traffic stacking up on the M20, it means hanging a right or left at Lille and diverting to grateful factories in Belgium and France. And nobody's suggesting or shouldn't be suggesting that this will all have an immediate impact. It's a supertanker, it takes time to turn around, which in a way is why the transition agreement at least provides some space for some thought and thinking and an opportunity that, in my view, we ought to take in terms of defining what our future relationship is going to be. But nobody should underestimate just what an opportunity we have presented to our continental partners who are interested in capturing more of our inward investment, financial services and GDP. Now, Monsieur Macron may not yet have the substance to back up his sales pitch, but I can tell you it sounds mightily attractive to those of us in the international business community who are thinking out where we might lay the next bet. And so, despite my frustration, the question has to be, where do we go from here? Well, in the absence of another close look at the decision to leave, which you could argue would be a sensible thing to do as true costs become known, business needs something that preserves as much as possible of single market access and customs union as possible. I see no other way to avoid a very painful redress. It's why we tend to feel somewhat reassured when we hear Philip Hammond's message of minimal disruption or the unity presented by him and Greg Clark and David Davis on putting British business and jobs at the heart of the negotiations. Because the facts and the data tell us that the alternative will be very painful in the short to medium term, with a slow but very discernible drift of existing investment away from the UK and a significant opportunity cost of that which never came. We therefore need clarity as quickly as possible on the government's final preferred destination for Brexit. Without that, business will do what it always does. It looks at the facts and data, and it will continue to make alternative plans. If this proves too difficult for us to determine what the final destination is in the short to medium term, then I would argue that membership of the European Economic Area surely has to be the best fallback option, and certainly as an alternative to the uncertainty of a prolonged transition while we figure out where we want to get to. Now is the time for level-headed evaluation of where we are and a pragmatic, measured response. Thank you for listening.